Thank you. Hi, everyone. So we're here to tell you about how to design an award-winning website. There is a disclaimer, of course. There's no guarantee that this will actually win you an award. Also, I have a small trigger warning before I start, because we'll be using some words that may offend some people. There's a couple, so we'll warn you about those. So how did we win an award, and what is this all about? What is this award about? So in last year, December 3rd, there was an award ceremony in Nashville, Tennessee at WordCamp US. These were the Automatic Design Awards. They were organized by Automatic, the company behind WordPress.com, initiated by John Maeda. And they wanted to celebrate good design in WordPress community or built on WordPress. Now let me do a quick introduction because you may want to know who I am and who we are. I'm Peter. I run a company called Frozen Rockets. It's a design studio. Last year, KIT Royal Tropical Institute, they called me and they asked me to help them design a new website. KIT is a knowledge institute. It's focused on sustainable development. And I knew it was going to be a WordPress website. So naturally, I wanted the best developer for the job. I called Luc.
Hello, I'm Luc. I work with WordPress. Now, I'm also a freelance developer and designer, and I work with lots of systems.
And there were a couple of other people involved on the client side, also on the design side. This, for the non-Dutch people here, this is called a distributed team here. We're about an hour away from each other, so it's kind of cute. So this award, they had two main criteria. It needed to be Gutenberg ready. It needed to be ready for the future, basically, because Gutenberg is a new content editor in WordPress. And they wanted to, have accessibility enabled. They wanted to honor work that shows that strong accessibility and strong design go hand in hand. And this is right up my alley, because this is what I'm trying to do in my daily work. I'd much rather win an award like this than some flash of the year website, I don't know. So what did we do? I think for strong design, which they wanted to have in this award, for that to happen, it's important that you create the right conditions. You set the stage. Not every project will lead to winning an award, of course, and neither should you aim to do that. But there are a lot of parts that you do have control over and that will make your work better, I think, and much more easy and much more fun, probably. Meetings, for instance. Meetings are often this thing that it kind of just happen and everyone is there and we're wasting time and no one is really having fun and it's not really productive. So you can be much more intentional about the meetings that you have. There's a great book that came out last year called Meeting Design by Kevin Hoffman. Game Storming by Sonny Brown is a great book. So in our kickoff meeting, we did an activity. It's called a pre-mortem. A pre-mortem, it's in projects that went wrong, it's common to do a post-mortem where you kind of ask yourself after the fact, what went wrong? How did this project went off the rails? But that's after the fact. You're retroactively finding out what went wrong. A pre-mortem is a way that you look ahead at the project. It's a pretty straightforward activity. You start the project by gathering your team and you're trying to come up with reasons, any reason basically why this project might go wrong. Any sort of, just be creative. You're trying to imagine yourself a month or 6 months or however long your project is going to last into the future and sort of come up with reasons. Because by doing this at the start of your project, you can set yourself up, at least you can set up a plan to mitigate the risk. So that's what we did. We had a couple of challenges. Want to go back? We had a couple of challenges. One thing is that we had a pretty tight deadline to work towards. It was about 4 months for the whole project, from start to finish, and that included a full content migration, so that was a big undertaking. Another big challenge we recognized pretty early on is that we needed to balance the interests of Kit's different departments. On the old website, each department basically had its own website. It was a WordPress multi-site. They all had their own buckets of content, their own interests, of course. And the new website needed to be migrated into one cohesive whole. And we still need to keep these stakeholders happy, of course. Now, I like to call design projects sort of self-help for organizations, because that's where this power struggles and friction sort of comes to the surface. And, well, you need to take that into account if you're designing or developing anything. Because, well, at least we wanted to do that. We wanted to design with accessibility in mind in a user-centered way. So you need to know how to package that in a way that, well, that they think it's their idea. That's a great idea that we're doing that. So we started the project by gathering as much data as we could because we needed the ammunition to convince them. So we gathered information about the old website. We did some top task analysis. We gathered data about the organization, about the stakeholders, about the politics, and of course about the users. So Kit's redesign, it was part of a larger rebranding program. It aimed to promote cross-pollination, collaboration across departments. So we knew we had to come up with a design that put this whole concept front and center. We needed to look for overlap and see where, well, how they are different, these departments, but also how they are similar. And with some exceptions, they are all pretty similar. Of course, they're all unique, at least, well. But they all do applied scientific research, and it's all kind of based around sustainable development. So that meant that everything that happened within Kit was in some form related to a project. So they offer different services as part of a project, which are then executed by their experts, ideally experts from different departments. And often a publication, like a scientific paper, can be the outcome of this project. So with this in mind, this project as sort of the cornerstone content, we had something to work with, because that is a place where we can link together these things into, in a way that makes sense. And this was consistent with some of the top task research that we did on the website. We ran this little widget on the old website where we gathered as much data as possible about people who visited the website who were interested in doing something. So we basically asked them, what are you trying to do on this website? And, well, did you achieve your goal? Why not? Well, these kinds of inputs were all used in the new redesign. So we started by designing the project page as the first template. And as Steven mentioned already in the talk before, I also do a lot of writing. I just write stuff down. There's squiggly lines, there's boxes, there's arrows, because we want to see connections, we want to see patterns. And at some point during writing, these patterns start to emerge. We start to see sort of, this makes sense, this could be a page. And of course, we looked at other data as well to see where there's room for improvement. Now, I know you're mostly developers, so I'm sorry about the C word. There's another trigger warning here. We're designing an interface that allows visitors to interact with content. This is what a website is, mostly. So everything we do should be about opening up that content to those visitors. That is why content should be on your mind throughout the project, because that is also what, for us, accessibility is about. We want to make sure that visitors can see the content, can access the content of the website. So everything we do is about that content, and we're trying to open that up to as many people as possible. So after this sort of sketching, discovery phase, that's the point where I like to jump into, well, wireframing, kind of. This is text-based design. It's basically just writing down Markdown for content of the page. And this is also my first steps towards actual wireframes, toward actual prototypes. This is very much influenced by Steven and the book he mentioned that he wrote a couple of years ago. It's called Responsive Design Workflow, of course. And I use Markdown for this because Markdown allows me to quickly transform this into different formats like HTML. And HTML is a great starting point for a prototype. Now there's not much CSS going on here. There's some for alignment and maybe some visual hierarchy, but that's basically it. But you get a feeling for what the website is starting to look like already, at least in terms of information architecture, hierarchy, navigation. Also notice that there is no lorem ipsum here. We wanted to use as much real content as possible because we wanted to know what this website would actually be doing. And that's also what this website is about, right? It's about content and it's about structuring content. On the visual design side, we were lucky to work with Stefan. He is a great graphic designer. He was working in parallel, did explorations on visual direction, but it didn't influence the interaction design, or at least not, it didn't direct the interaction design. And also not the other way around, because like as Steven mentioned, you don't want to reduce your visual designer to a sort of paint by numbers exercise. So we took this project page as a starting point for our design and we built the rest around that. So we have this sort of mobile website kind of view. It's just one text column and the rest is moved out of the way to the side. It's there, but it's not as it's discreetly buried in the sidebars. And we did that for related content because we wanted to use this project page as a page that could link together different pieces of content. So services, experts, and other related pieces of content. Now we presented this, and I think it's important to note that if you're presenting your design to your clients, that you should use that data that you gathered, that you should take control of the room, and that you shouldn't make it about taste, colors, typography, whatever. They don't really care about that, I think. It should serve their business. So that's what we're trying to do, and I think it went well because we got sign-off. And I was still on my way to make this project secretly about accessibility. And this is where Luc takes over.
Yeah. Okay, so we now have our wireframes. We have the beginning of a visual design, basically, and this is the first time in the process that I actually get to do some work. I get to do some coding. I mean, I was at all the meetings. I was at the pre-mortem, and we talked a lot about maybe the intricacies of the technical spec we were using. But in this case, we finally get to some back-end development. Again, that's a trigger warning, and heads up, there's another one coming, because we're going to talk about the mammoth in the room, which is WordPress. WordPress is gigantic, it's ancient, and it's kind of hairy. So for developers, I can definitely see why the Stack Overflow Developer Survey of 2019 ranked WordPress as the most dreaded platform ever. It's been in the top 5 for a few years, and we finally reached number 1. We did it. But it's really not that difficult to see why it's the number 1 dreaded platform, and that's because WordPress is over 16 years old already. In web terms, that's ancient, right? And I promise you that if you'll go and dig through WordPress core, you'll come upon code that was written 16 years ago. Some of it even not namespaced correctly or prefixed correctly. All of these years of adding APIs and new technology to that platform have led to gigantic technical debt for WordPress. Fun fact, if you take WordPress core and put it through Code Climate, which checks technical debt, then Code Climate will tell you that it will take one developer working reasonable hours, approximately 15 years to get rid of all the technical debt in WordPress. Whether or not that number is exaggerated, I don't know. It's a clear sign, though, that yes, this is an ancient platform. But WordPress now also powers approximately 34% of the web, which is huge, right? I mean, there's clearly some kind of disconnect here between developers and what they would like to work with and users. I mean, it's being used by giant publishing houses like Time and CNN. Or whether or not you think this is a great example, but the White House currently also runs WordPress. So this mammoth isn't going anywhere. And lucky for us, it isn't stuck in some sort of permafrost. There's constantly new APIs coming out, and I promise you, it's quite possible to work with WordPress and still keep your sanity. I mean, I'm still standing. I have another trigger warning ready for the accessibility people in the room, because we're going to talk about WordPress's latest tool, which is Gutenberg. And the accessibility people in the room will already know why this is troublesome. I'll explain it to the rest later. Now, Gutenberg was created to replace the ancient TinyMCA content editor in WordPress. It's a block editor, it's completely modular, it's written in React and modern JavaScript. And at the time that we were technically speccing out this project, Gutenberg was already kind of stable. I mean, the block API, which we needed to create custom blocks, was very stable, and then the rest was kind of a moving target still. But overall, we made like a pro and con list saying, should we use the new shiny thing? And there were a few pros, like, okay, if we do this, we're future oriented. Gutenberg was scheduled for a release in August of 2018. We were scheduling our release on September of 2018, so releasing a website that then immediately is outdated seemed horrible to me. Another pro is it's fully modular. And the biggest one, and I think that's the most important one, is we had a content team that was very well aware of the capabilities of modern web applications and how content could and should look. So giving them access to an easier to use content editor that's maybe not completely ready for live environments yet, but still we might be able to work around with that. That was for us the main reason to go with Gutenberg. Like the shiny new thing in your project, that's all well and good. But if you do not have an excuse that incorporates either your client's best wishes or your user's best wishes, you might think again on using that shiny new thing. So we have these wireframes basically, and this is the project page. We knew we were going to create the project page first because there were many projects and this was the cornerstone content. The content team needed to basically gather all of the projects from 7 different websites and turn it into a single page, single site. And we already know that we're going to have to build some blocks here custom that aren't in WordPress default. But the benefit of modularity, modular development, means that we can first look at where there is overlap. We can start looking at, well, what are some things that we're going to need throughout the site that are without even looking at blocks that we're going to reuse. And then we came to the related content section of projects. So I was actually involved pretty early on, even without the design phase being done, and seeing if we could create related content. Now there's basically 2 ways you can do related content. You can fully automate it using tags and categories and such, or you can handpick them, which is just a link. But I went to the Kit content team because at this point my target audience, the people I was developing for, were the Kit content team, and then I asked them, how much editorial control do you want? I mean, it's kind of strange to develop something and then later go to your client, ask for permission to use it, and if you're lucky, they'll let you get away with it, and if you're not lucky, they'll give you a giant list of changes you need to make. So how much editorial control do you need? And we ended up using a sort of hybrid solution where we could just, we add an expert block in this case. We type in a name, we can type in a profession, but there's also that little button underneath it to search for an expert. And we can just search through all of the experts in WordPress itself, and then it will automatically populate it. And then once that's automatically populated, this link is live. So if you change something on the site of that expert, it'll get changed in the block. Unless you overwrite it by hand, by changing the email address, for instance, then it will always show that single email address on that single page. So this is just a simple React component. And in this case, we definitely did use a button tag, don't worry. But we can drop this in anywhere, and we ended up using this in 7 different blocks, I think. Of course, I was enthusiastic about it, so I wrote something on Twitter, and then Party Pooper Peter said, how about keyboard accessibility? And I said, well, shit, yeah, you're right, it's not keyboard accessible yet. So I took half an hour and made it keyboard accessible, even though my current target audience, the content team at Kit, at that moment, there was nobody there with a disability. Everyone was using a mouse. There was no problem, but you know, we have no idea what that content team might look like in a year or in 5 years. We have no idea if we want to reuse those components. The entire idea of modular design and modular development is that we can reuse some of these building bricks later on. So we ended up building 6 custom components and then using 30 custom blocks basically for Kit. And we had the luck that we could immediately test everything with our target audience. So we just had a Slack channel set up basically, and I would show little sketches of fields and UI and say, would this work for you? Would this work for you? They would give very quick feedback, and eventually things got into code. You have to be lucky with a client like that also respects your boundaries, but is also willing to provide basically constant feedback. But if you have them, please make use of them and just set up a Slack channel like this. It'll help you so much in the long run. Communication between you and a client is very important in that way. Now, we've basically created the backend. The content team is already churning out new project pages, and I'll leave it to Peter to talk a bit about the front-end development.
Yes. Now this should get everyone excited because we're at Front-End United, of course, and we all want to talk about front-end development and not so much about how to do design presentations maybe. So I'm going to make you happy. I'm going to show you HTML. This is HTML that gets outputted by some of the blocks in Gutenberg. So this was a related expert for a project. And now we can start styling those because we have the HTML. We thought about the content and the structure of that. And now we kind of knew where we wanted to go visually. So we had some basic CSS in place, and this is where we can start to work on the design. Of course, we did some visual design, we did interaction design, but we also did a lot of design in the browser. And when people talk about designing in a browser, they often assume that all design tools, static design tools, are thrown out the window. No one uses Photoshop or Sketch or Figma, or whichever tool you prefer these days, are thrown out the window, and everybody just becomes a front-end developer or a UX engineer or whatever it's called these days. They start typing code and everyone's a designer now. But I much more prefer Dan Moll's idea of not designing in a browser, but deciding in a browser, because there's value to these static design tools for figuring out stuff, but there's also value to working in a browser to decide on responsive behavior, on performance and accessibility, of course. These are things that happen in a browser, so you need to treat it as a website, because it is. Work with material. So when we take this HTML that Gutenberg sends to the browser and we add some more styling, Now we have a website. It's starting to look like something, and we can start working on specific details, like there's no hover styles, and when I tab through it, I only see the browser default focus styles, which is, of course, better than nothing, but we can improve on that, I think. Now, I knew I had your attention when I mentioned front-end development, but, well, plot twist, this is actually about accessibility. Because I wanted to talk about how thinking about accessibility and keeping that in mind throughout the project informed some design decisions that we made. Let's look at keyboard accessibility, for instance. I mentioned focus styles. So not much there, no hover styles. Of course, we can add a underline for hover, nothing fancy. This is one where you want to stick to conventions probably. And we add a focus style. And instead of removing the outline, let's make it a bit more explicit. Because we want those keyboard users to also, well, like this website. Also, see how long this took me to design a focus style. There's no excuse for not doing this. And we did this throughout the website. We wanted to make sure that keyboard users would find this an easy to use and pleasant to use website. So let's take these card components, this sort of, well, this is a very familiar thing, this card grid. Some basic HTML. There's a list item with a class of card, and then there's a link inside and an image. Don't forget your alt attributes, never, of course. And we had some basic styling for hover and focus for the links, just a basic underline. But although this technically covers WCAG, the accessibility guidelines, we're compliant, we're accessible. Accessibility is also about usability. So how can we improve this? We can improve this by adding a focus within, for instance. It's a relatively new CSS property, but it's well supported. So if an element in this card, in this case, so the link has focus, then do something to the card. In this case, add a box shadow of 4 pixels. What this does is now, it makes it a bit more clear where you are on the page and makes it easier to navigate with a keyboard. We also added things like, of course, skip links, because they deserve attention. It's nothing special, nothing fancy, but it's often left out or forgotten. Because now a keyboard user can skip all the navigation items, search box, and they can jump right into the content if they want to. So this is a free accessibility testing that I give you. Everyone can do this. There's no excuse to not do this. Just throw your mouse out for an hour and just start using your keyboard. Do this on your websites, and you'll start to see these patterns appear. Things that don't work, modals, other kinds of pop-up things, custom form elements. This is really easy. This is free. Everyone can do this. So like I said, the nice thing about working in code is also that we can automate things. So this one slipped through the cracks in the design phase. The color for the word project had a too low contrast on the white. That can happen. But since we have this in code and we're designing in code and not all design decisions have been made in a sort of siloed design phase, we can still make these adjustments. This was a result of the brand colors that we were working with. We've already figured that some combinations would probably not work. Yellow on white, probably not. Black on blue, probably not. We had enough experience to recognize these, but some were, well, we didn't see them right away. So what we needed to do is come up with more options. But this is not something that we did in the design phase or design phase. This is something that happened in the browser. This is something that we did during front-end development, or what you would traditionally call front-end development. And this gave us a lot more options to work with. Nothing special, just chose a slightly darker shade of green. It was still on brand, but it made it much more easy to read for many more people. And this is also a benefit to working with overlapping disciplines. This is where these are things that you want your designer to do. These are not things that you don't want a designer to hand a list of color combinations or color codes, shoot them in Jira or whatever bug tracking systems you have. So a developer can spend a portion of his day to change color combination in code. There are much harder development challenges to solve probably. And well, we spent quite some time making sure the content is visually structured and there's a clear visual hierarchy. We also wanted this to be reflected in the non-visual structure of the page. So heading levels. When you use some word processor like Microsoft Word or Pages or Google Docs, you can have these auto-generated index. If you use the right heading styles, then you can just generate an index and it will make it for you. This is what screen reader users can also do. They can call for all the headings on a page and it will create a nice index of a page and they get a nice overview of what this page is about and they can navigate it that way. These are all no hard things that I mentioned. I mean, keyboard accessibility, color accessibility, using semantic HTML. It's not hard accessibility problems. Some people might have a different opinion. But remember when I said this was about accessibility, well, it was about front-end development all along, because this is part of our job. These are no things that an accessibility expert should be fixing. These are things that come with responsibility that we have as developers and as designers. And it's all these tiny things that add up to a more accessible website. The website we made is not perfect, but it's doing pretty well in terms of accessibility. And it makes it usable for much more people. And this is on you. There's no excuse for a project manager or scope or whatever, because no project manager will ask you to use a div or a span instead of a button. This is something that you do. This doesn't take extra time even. So we have sort of front-end templates. And as much as I hate silo working, it still needs to work in WordPress. It still needs to be implemented in Gutenberg. So there was one silo, and that was Luc. So I'm going to hand this over to you, because I like to leave this to the expert.
Thank you. Yeah, so we now have front-end designs for all of these nice components, and we have a decent back-end. There's content being added, so we're on the right track. But then the last stage, basically, of this entire process is me making sure it all fits together. As I mentioned, Gutenberg is a content editor, meaning you can create a perfectly good medium post with it, but it's kind of hard to use it for things like headers, footers, navigation menus. Its intention is to finally shift over from a content editor to that, but we're just not there yet. And we were thinking, well, are we going to introduce this content team to another interface? Are we going to, how are we going to solve this? And we basically said, no, we want to work with blocks everywhere. We have this cool system set up now, so everyone can basically create blocks, and we have infinite expandability. So how are we going to do that? A couple of months ago, I had this talk on my desktop entitled WordPress. And it made me think of this when I first saw how Gutenberg in WordPress saves data. Because this is what it looks like. All the information is in an HTML comment, and then there's the HTML in between. If you look at the entire page, then this is what it looks like. It's just one giant blob of HTML. There's no structure here. This is basically just being presented as, here, puke this in your main element and be done with it. So we need to do something to make sure we can run Gutenberg in an accessible manner, so we can actually differentiate between the actual content on the page, related content, sidebar content, metadata, stuff like that. So how do we go about producing a full page of semantic HTML? Well, this is one of the big loose ends of Gutenberg itself. Gutenberg, by the way, you can run completely apart from WordPress now. It's a standalone thing. You can. It's running in Drupal. It's running in Laravel. It's probably running in a lot more CMSs and systems that I know about. But the thing is, this way of saving data, that's unique to WordPress. So we gave it our own WordPress flair. But there's a way in Gutenberg to basically just get an entire neat JSON file of all the blocks in your on your page back. So we basically had to get around WordPress core and say, when you save a post, don't save it the regular way. That's stupid. Just save it like loose blocks in a database. And now that we have this exploded blob, we can then start putting it back together again, and in a semantic way. I mean, we can have it in the article, and that article can have a footer, and it can have an aside for related content, stuff like that. Now, why did we do it this way? Well, the main reason, again, is accessibility. We wanted people to be able to use this site wherever and whenever, and that includes semantic markup. You might say that seems like a lot of work. Why didn't you just do what WordPress suggested, puke it all into a main element, and then use CSS to basically fix the layout? Well, I look at these two images and I think, where would I rather work? What would I rather come back to? Doing semantic HTML and doing quality code isn't just for accessibility or for code review or whatever. It's about first making something that you're proud of, and then second of all, making something that's easy to come back to later. Because let's talk about what a user is. I mean, yeah, users are people that are coming to your site, but users are also authors writing content on that site. They are editors or admins, making sure the site runs smoothly. Users are even other developers that have to work with your code later on. I don't know if any of you know that meme. The amount of fucks you hear means the quality of the code is going down, right? That's one metric we're trying to avoid. And other developers, in this case, can also mean you in the future again. So just leave it as it should be. Do good work. Now, all of the changes Peter talked about and the things I talked about, these aren't big things. They're small incremental changes that eventually add up to easy to use and accessible website. Accessibility happens in the in-betweens. It happens inside design. It happens inside of the development phase. It doesn't happen on its own in a silo. Same for user experience. This might be a way of how people still work, but I can guarantee you, if show me a manager that had a project come in time and in budget and on scope, and I'll show you what's wrong with it. Now, there's one thing I'd like to talk about at the moment, which is I'm very proud of the work we did on that website, and I'm very proud of the code we left behind. But the thing is, Gutenberg itself currently isn't accessible yet by a long shot in WordPress backend. It recently had an accessibility audit, which was released last week, I think. And they said Gutenberg can be described at best as poor to okay. The accessibility audit led to 90 new issues, of which 70 were critical. Simply put, we need some help. I have no idea if there are any React developers in the room, but you're bound to at least run into them during lunch. If you know React or if you know modern JavaScript, you have a base understanding of accessibility. Go to Gutenberg's GitHub page, download a copy, install the standalone version. I'm not asking you to install WordPress. and try to fix the ticket, because this stuff is real. I mean, this is running on 1/3 of the web, more even if Drupal is bringing in users, Laravel is bringing in users, and it's a standalone thing. So that's my call to action to you. But we made a talk telling you how to design an award-winning site. Now the thing is, I don't think I have an answer for you. The only thing is, we had this jury quote when we received the award in Nashville that said, having inclusive design incorporated into every step of the process. And I think that's what I'm most proud about in this project, and why I like that we actually won an award for it. So it's always possible to make sure you incorporate good, accessible user experience design into your projects. If accessibility and usability wasn't in the budget or the scope, there's something wrong with the budget or the scope. And you're allowed to say this during meetings. You're allowed to make some noise and bang your fist on the table. Small stuff and attention to detail from you eventually will add up. And there's no excuses not to make a great site or a great project. Thank you.